Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to You Are Always Scaling What Early Stage Founders Must Get Right. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit improving access and knowledge in entrepreneurship to advance economic progress for all. Now, we are going to launch a few polls to step back and take a temperature gauge on how everyone is doing today. And we use this information to guide the programs that we provide for this global community of entrepreneurs. So, if there are specific topics or challenges you'd like us to create programs or resources for, definitely share those in the chat. And as you will see in the chat, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs to help entrepreneurs fuel prosperity no matter where their journey begins. So definitely check out those links and resources. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from by dropping it in the chat. We'd love to see where everyone's joining us for our time together today. And second, we are going to have a live Q&A at the end of the event, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time using that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to as many as we can, and any that we aren't able to get to, we'll follow up on after the event. And while you are answering, I'd love to just take a moment to recognize the incredible support of our corporate partners. The work that we do at the center would not be possible without the generosity and belief of our partners and funders, including NASDAQ, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asia Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the Nareit Foundation, and BPM. We are deeply grateful for their partnership, and we hope you'll join us in sharing that appreciation. Awesome. All right, we got this last poll going here. Wonderful. Let's see who we got. We got folks from all over the place. Wonderful. Virginia, Maryland, Illinois, Louisiana, Chicago, Connecticut, San Diego, Seattle, Washington, Illinois, Maryland, South Carolina, New Jersey, Georgia. Welcome, welcome, everyone. So great to have you all joining us from all over the place. Wonderful. All right. So, at this time, without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Lindsay Ruiz, founder and CEO at Human as Usual. Lindsay, it is such a pleasure to have you here for this topic. Super excited, and I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Oh my goodness, I am so pleased and pumped and energized to be a part of this amazing community and have the opportunity to contribute and share, hopefully, ideas and food for thought that can help everyone that's in this sometimes unpredictable founder's journey, which I am on as well. I will go ahead before anything, prepare here to share my screen, and then I'll do a formal introduction and we get right into it. If here, you can see my screen, right?
Looks great.
Awesome. All right. I am going to start by sharing just a little bit about me. I want you to know that the topic that we're going to discuss today is something I personally have been working on for a very long time. I now have the opportunity to apply a lot of the ideas that I will share with you in my own startup that I call Human as Usual. I have been really focused on building something that could last for a long time. I'm a big believer of creating ideas and putting ideas out into the world that can make a difference. And I also would like to continue to be an advocate for our humanity and what it means to be human in everything that we put out into the world, especially with the challenges that we face today. I work founder to founder. I have I'll focus specifically on the growth stage of companies that are really building in more and more complexity to establish themselves as an organization in the market. But I also have a particular sentiment, a particular vision for what it means to be a leader in a company and what it means to put companies out there that could support our growth as a humanity as well. So I had a question ahead of time in some of the forms that all of you filled out, who asked, why did you want to have a company to begin with after being in a career in the corporate sector for a long time? And my personal why is really about people believing, again, not only in the companies we are building, but in the leaders we look up to and the leaders that we are, and the potential that we have to change things in the products and services and ideas we create and consume. I see scaling as building something that lasts and something that's worth believing in. And that's the energy and that's the passion that I bring to you today. So before we enter the agenda specifically, I want to level set us in what is my perspective of scaling. We typically hear about scaling from sales, marketing, revenue, customers point of view. I focus more on the trajectory of scaling, what it means to go through that process of growth, keep growing, and the complexities that build up as the trajectory moves along the timelines where leadership starts to stretch in, where pressure begins to mount. Some businesses scale to exit, and that's okay. There's a lot of serial entrepreneurs that are passionate about the dynamic part of building companies that can then be transacted. Other founders are more concerned with building companies that can last and outlive the test of time. Both are valid, but they don't follow the same path and they don't have the same challenges. They need to build a different muscle. So from my perspective, scaling has different forms depending on what kind of founder you are or we are. There's the perspective of the solopreneur, which I know there are a number of you in the audience today, where scaling means not doing everything alone anymore when you start feeling that sense of overwhelm, where you want to incorporate more assistance, maybe hiring a virtual assistant, maybe productizing a service, anything that can help you buy time back. There is the early stage startup founder that we know traditionally, for which the focus is to find product market fit again and again. For these type of founders, scaling could mean building a team that can hold the vision while the company, the product, the service, what is being put out into the market continues to prove itself. There is the growth stage company, which is the one that I particularly focus on my day-to-day, for which scaling means transforming what has been working and turning that into something repeatable. It could be stabilizing chaos, learning to lead through other people, maybe establishing more formal processes and scalable solutions that can support the company at scale. And then the last two that I also look into in terms of what scaling means, we have late stage companies for which now they need to establish themselves better from a cultural perspective. Maybe now they're looking to innovate in terms of the systems they want to bring in for more automation. Maybe they're looking to diversify the type of products they put out into the market. For these companies, scaling might mean preparing, getting ready for an IPO or an acquisition without losing the core of what the company has been. And lastly, there's the enterprise level. I personally come from the corporate space. I spent about 20 years leading big, large-scale transformation initiatives. And in this environment, scaling means we have to protect innovation within the operations now with thousands and thousands of people that belong to the same company and a number of departments and complexities that we need to now align in order to stay alive for the longer run. So today, I particularly put something together that could serve the early stage startups, those who are still thinking about building their idea into a company at some point. However, a lot of the topics that I have are going to speak to all of you. And so I hope that you're going to be able to take something away that applies to your particular situation. But the point is, you're always scaling, no matter where you are, and no matter the extent of which you want to take your company or your business or your idea forward. There is always this sense of growth that is important and is healthy to make sure that we have businesses that can thrive and can stay in business for as long as we can. So the bigger picture always comes with a few statistics. I think it's important to understand the landscape of scaling as an organization. What are some of the risks and the chances that we have, right, to get it right? And we always hear about 90% of the startups don't make it past year one or so forth. But as you move through the trajectory of scaling, these statistics continue to apply. We just don't talk about them enough. And they become filters. So the companies that do make it through each of these filter stages become even less and less in the opportunity that they have to sustain themselves throughout the process. When we get to the growth stage, which is the statistic that I particularly take super seriously in terms of what I want to help, change the narratives about, is that even as you make it through the initial stages, the market testing, you now have established place in the consumer mind. Still takes a lot to make those companies move past the changes that it takes to build an entire organization that can last more and more and more years. We're still talking about 70% failure, even as you make it up to the level where your company is an actual company and you have employees in them and you have leadership teams and you have systems and technologies and everything in place. It doesn't get easier from there. So the intentionality that I would love for founders and leaders to have and think their organizations through is necessary for us to beat these odds and be able to see more and more companies successful and thriving in our marketplaces. And if we think about investment, there was a question which we're going to address later around, how to handle investors and how to talk to them and where to find them. The most recent reporting from Bloomberg based on Bank of America's Global Fund Manager Survey that just came out in April also shows, right, that we are in times that are unprecedented. So having the awareness of the navigation we have to do to keep our companies afloat is extremely important, probably more than ever before. These statistics now show that the investor sentiment is at all times low. 80% of them in the survey communicated, right, that there are immense tension and risk when it comes to the global trade landscape. And we might say, well, that doesn't affect me, but it really does. Everything that happens in the external environment has some kind of ripple effect in how we see our businesses being successful here at home. And specifically when it comes to every part of our organization that has a human touch point, it's important to even be more intentional and more prepared to navigate these new challenges. So part of what I focus on from a human as usual perspective is 5 specific touch points of human tensions that could create risks as we think about our different kinds of organizations. So some of them have to do with our leadership and management capacity. Others have to do with the pace that we take to scale our companies. I know there's a lot of pressure lately for our companies to be productive and to be on business super quickly. But there's also a downside for how fast we can actually go and how ready we are to move at certain pace. And then I also, always talk about the integration of complexities. The bigger the company, the longer the trajectory, the more things you're going to be adding up until it becomes uncontrollable. And we'll get to talk about that in just a minute for just a little bit. And then we have the conversations around skill set and values and how do we align those, which obviously when there's market turbulence, there's an important impact in how the climate of the organization needs to turn in order to support our teams to help us do the work that we are there to do. And then there's the cultural piece, which we also hear a lot about. I go a little deeper on the cultural lens that I think is necessary for us to hold as we think about our vision and our future, which is our own identity as an organization. Sometimes, when you're a solopreneur, you are the identity of your business. But when you are in a bigger company, it is the compound of your leadership, your teams, your values, in the way in which we behave inside the organization that helps us define, right? What is our identity? Who are we? What do we believe in? And where does that need to evolve as well to adapt to either market changing conditions or anything else that our strategy might demand as we move forward. So we're going to touch on some of these things. I'm going to, click into each of these categories of what I call human tensions. And I also want us to think through the psychology that goes into these dynamics. When we decide to become a founder, when we have a vision and a dream for creating a company, we are taking not only a business trajectory and decisions that could affect how we become more or less participants, right, in a new market, in a new industry, but it also has an emotional toll that we are accepting, that we are signing up for as we consider our companies part of creating something meaningful, right, in the world. So I don't necessarily advocate for the idea of scaling to be seen as a phase or as a specific capability. I think it's a condition. I think we bring that condition into our companies. We're just not asked to do more. We are constantly asked to be more, to become more adaptive, more emotionally regulated, more fluent to execute, more capable of navigating uncertainty and maintain our coherence, right? Our good decision-making capacity as we go through this process. And there is, a lot of choices that we have to make on a day-to-day basis. And I think as we make those choices and we gain more clarity, we are also put on a test that goes beyond the corporate strategy or the company strategy. It's a test of our heart. It's a test of our purpose and what we actually believe in. Scaling demands, that we expand our identity, that we embrace the emotional load of it so that we can lead with the purpose that we intend, not just from an operational standpoint. So that's going to reveal our emotional maturity, our identity, our stability, I rather for what our human capacity is within the company, which is going to then support our technical and marketing and market capacity and risks that we need to mitigate. If we leave human tensions unaddressed at scale, they're just going to amplify and they're going to multiply. And we don't want to get to a point where we're normalizing these tensions for too long that they become our own detriment as an organization. So unresolved emotional and relationship fractures are going to surface once our company becomes bigger and more costly and more or less manageable at scale. And then I mentioned ethos dilution, and this is a very important part of it because we typically treat it as a branding problem, but in reality, it is emotional disconnection within the company, right? We always want to try to maintain an environment where people feel like they are a part of it, that they belong, as we typically say, and that there's shared meaning inside the company so that the effort of scaling can actually hold and sustain. And in general, what we would like to always consider is, how are we trying to promote and protect a healthy organization, a healthy environment that can translate into healthy execution. As leaders, as founders, we have the responsibility, having decided to go in this direction, to protect, right, those patterns, and to protect the agency that we have to make those conscious decisions, which is going to translate eventually in our ability to go through that trajectory of scale for as long as we can. There was a question that came up in the preliminary interest form that the team sent out as the session was being promoted, and somebody asked, what do I do when I'm the first in my community with an idea and local leaders discourage support for that idea? And I didn't have this in my psychology view of scaling, but I think it belongs in here because there is a silent tax for being early. I know that I navigate this dilemma as well when you have a vision that no one is able to see yet, but it's a solid vision, it's a solid idea. And when your vision outpaces the comfort of your environment, of your peers, of your leaders, the resistance or the quote unquote lack of support might feel personal, but it is a challenge for us to understand that it's not. They are just not ready to see your particular way in which you want to solve that problem. And in that case, the approach, at least that I take for myself, is I find other allies. I find other people that can actually see the potential, right, of my ideas, of my vision, of the passion that I have for the problems I want to solve. And it's gonna be a quest in a way of always finding the people that can help you amplify and clarify, right, the vision that you already have, expanding your circle. I think this community that we have here is a great example of that. So that we are getting more and more clear as opposed to more and more discouraged. But that is also part of our readiness from a psychological perspective to go in this direction. So I'm going to break down the 5 human tensions that I mentioned at the beginning. Again, this is probably going to be more or less applicable depending on what type of scaling you are pursuing for your own purpose. But I think everyone can take something away that could inform any future decisions or any future ideas you might be considering. So as we think about leadership and management gaps, we always have to keep in mind that scaling amplifies leadership misalignment. Every layer of leadership that we build inside the company is just going to create more contradictions sometimes, right? Depending on the points of view that we now need to make sure become congruent as we make decisions at the leadership level, as we pass those decisions on to the teams that need to operate on those decisions. Maybe we have to also convince and be transparent with other layers of leadership that are not internal to the organization, like investors and board members and whatnot. But nonetheless, as growth accelerates, the leadership team face unseen tensions that, if they go unaddressed, could fracture the execution and the culture. They may be facing, slower decision making. We could be confronting unspoken frustrations. We could be seeing conflicting execution priorities, retention of risks at the top, right? Everything that disrupts the fluency of scaling could be an important gap that we as leaders, as teams, as owners of organizations need to be able to keep an eye on at all times so that we can minimize the disruption that might create in our ability to push our companies forward. There's always going to be a regression loop that's going to form somewhere. And being able to have a pulse of that and facilitate it and be able to intervene as quickly as possible is also going to make a difference on how fast we can go. The audience asked a question in the early on about the advice that I would have for finding investors and customers early. And I know this is an urgency, especially if you are still a very, very small startup that has one or two people, or maybe you're a solopreneur looking for people that can believe in your idea, in your venture. There are different organizations that can help facilitate how to get close to investors. I don't recommend one in specific, but what I do want to say is the investor's job, especially as they become part of the leadership capability of your company, is to spend very little time with founders and quickly make high ticket investments to stay ahead of other competitors. So your organization is precious because not only you have to think about building those relationships with them for the benefit of your organization and what you can do, right, to pursue more market opportunities, but it is depending on these relationships that we have with them that we can invite them in to believe in what we have as potential. Every interaction with an investor, like in any other type of relationship, whether it is your customers, whether it is your teams, whether it is your leadership team and your peers, is going to depend on trust in what that every interaction counts and that you're bringing something valuable that people want to be a part of. So I would say as you look for people to invest and believe in your company and put money towards growing your company with you, think about it as a form of resonance. Early investors and customers are often buying you. And that's something that for me was a little new to understand as a founder, as opposed to being in the corporate space. But they truly are looking to see who you are. What is your credibility? What is your discipline? What are your values? What are your convictions? Because that's going to translate into the product and how solid you can actually grow an organization that can become profitable. So make sure you're clear on the problem that you're solving, show proof of momentum, even if it's tiny proof, and make sure that as you approach investors in your different categories, you're not only approaching them from a place of potential, but actually from a place of clarity. And there are accelerators that could, help you navigate those environments, especially on the VC side of things. Okay. Shifting gears, I'm going to talk about the second level of human tensions that I always look into as I work with my clients and actually in my own company. The idea that we have to scale quickly and fast and hustle through it. And what does that mean in reality when scaling too fast becomes uncontrollable? As we always see in these scaling curves, it gives the illusion that we're always going up the ladder, but in reality, there's a point in time when it can actually spreads away. We have different variables affecting our ability to stay stable, and those variables are going to determine whether we actually make it through the humps of scaling and breakout and all these fancy hyper growth and IPOs and exit and all these amazing goals that some founders are pursuing. But there's also the same chance that it could decline and decay and pretty much end the idea as we become, incapable of controlling, right? How we are sustaining the scaling process more deliberately. And there's another piece that actually costs more for the company and for the investors and for everybody involved in the process, which is getting stuck in regression loops. When we see that the company is not able to move forward because there's so much restart and reset that happens internally, which could happen because there's external direction that is confusing. It could happen because there are bottlenecks internal that affect leaders and teams working together. It could happen because there are gaps in the execution that are not being managed and really monitored and execute and acted on with discipline. It could be at some point that there's a disconnection of purpose and the vision the founder had versus where the company is now that may make it look unrecognizable, for which founders and leaders may feel like they're losing control of their company and don't know how to rail it back. And there will be cultural fractures if we let it go to that point that are important to also manage in the process and to also evolve as we go through that curve of scaling that we are executing on. So it's as you decide to grow your company, especially, right, if you are one of those people like me who want to take an idea and actually build that, right, in an infrastructure that could eventually become an organization with employees and all the 9 yards. When you decide on the pace of scaling, even though we do need to try to make it fast, as fast as possible so we can see result over result, the stability of execution alignment and the ability to adapt is going to be as important for us to measure and for us to have the capabilities that we need to make that happen, so that we're not necessarily scrambling once the company becomes bigger and more complex with taking a whole step back to try to understand how we got there. There was another question. I'm gonna be popping up questions that I got ahead of time, and then we'll get to the questions that get in real time today. But these may start answering some questions you already have. There was someone who asked, what AI tools do you recommend startups specifically that are looking to scale? Again, I don't know. I'm hesitant to prescribe recommendations because I don't know exactly, right, where each of you are. And specifically when it comes to AI and any other kind of technology, anything you bring into your organization has to be based on your specs and your requirements and what are you going to use it for. So what I would say is it's less about the tool more than it is about how you want to use it, right? If you take into account that more or less you're going to be dealing with these variables, right, along your effort of scaling and executing within your startup or your company. AI should amplify the clarity that you're looking for to keep your effort stabilized and organized. And to remove, obviously, the noise and the extra work that's not necessary, that is creating confusion and lack of productivity, like we hear all the time. So using it to maybe document knowledge or speed up workflows or free up human capacity so that the humans can go and do all the creative work, the innovative work that is actually going to make your company unique and iconic. But one thing I would say is don't outsource your own decision making to any tool. Before you bring a tool into your organization, just think that the decision making still needs to stay with you, and the tool is just going to facilitate how you execute on those decisions. I'm going to add another layer, and it's probably starting to look overwhelming, and it's on purpose. Because it is overwhelming, and it's important for me that those of you who have not gone through this process before have a little way to look around the corner and sneak on what you need to prepare for. And the other part of it is the more you go through the stages of scale. So if you are, in this case, I'm using the startup model, but in general, you're going to be moving through an early stage where it's more transactional, where you're focused on doing, and it's very entrepreneurial, and right, you need to get things done quickly and very scrappy. But as you move your organization forward and you include more people and you include more systems and more tools and more leaders and more investors and board members and whatnot, if that's your ambition, that type of change is going to change as well, right? You're going to move into another evolutionary stage of other different kinds of change that's now shifting for how you and your company has to work. Now it's more cross-functional, which is going to require a facilitation of different touch points within your company to continue to evolve, to not get stuck. If you become even bigger and start tapping into creating an enterprise, now you're going to tap into more transformational type of changes where you are focused now on the who you are as a company. There's a lot of risk and focus on building your internal culture, your internal way of behaving, what you value, how that translates into your operations. And that is going to be fundamental if you want to keep it going and make it to the next step, right? Where you're finally reaching the point where your company is established and can stay and will stay, right, for the longer run. Where now you need to commit better to what kind of company you are and why do you exist now at a much more larger scale that is probably going to last, years and years down the road. So if you look at it systemically, there is just a ton of change that's always happening. And that is why it feels bulky and complex and overwhelming, because we are putting layer upon layer of things that we need to be able to absorb, we need to be able to see clearly, and we need to be able to execute on with as much clarity as we can. And what I see often happening is that it's not that these type of different levels of change take the company by surprise because they couldn't prepare for it. It's more likely that the company didn't pause to integrate them. So it's good to have these long-term. I had a mentor who used to say, the one with the largest view wins. If you're able to see long-term and you're able to have a good view systemically of what you're trying to do with your company, you will be more prepared to predict, right, where you need to take turns and pivots and where you need to reassess before it becomes a whole different animal that you're trying to solve in retrospect. Here's another question that may be applicable here at this juncture. How should I organize systems once they're in place? And this is super typical, right? We start at the very early stages, implementing the things that we know. And then as you grow and you start encountering different challenges and different, more macro, decisions to be made, and you start to see that your systems and your processes and your tools are no longer sufficient. So once you start layering systems, I would say the goal isn't just visibility, but it is order. Like how can you always try to maintain a one source of truth with the system, the processes, and the capabilities, right, that you incorporate into your company. So how do you find tools and processes internally that help you maintain help you anchor rather your operations in a way that you can actually visualize, right, what the performance and the behavior of the company is. Some companies use dashboards and they're very focused on data collection and transfer that data into dashboards that can help them dilute the performance of the company so they can make quick decisions based on data. Some others focus more on the unification, let's say, of the philosophy of the company as the one way in which we work. We typically hear the Nike's way or the Netflix way, but something that can bring that type of coherence where you have a filter, right, to bring all your systems, your processes, and your decision making through. Now we're going to touch on talent from the perspective of skills and values. Uh, I I think that bringing brilliant people into a company is never an issue. We all want to have the best talent, and we always want to have the people that are going to live and breathe and give everything for our companies to be successful. But one thing is to bring skill set, and another thing is to bring values and principles and find those two on the same page. And so, what I would say is rather than being about having the right people on the bus or the wrong people on the bus, it's about having them in the right roles, depending on what stage of growth you're in. It's not going to be the same to have somebody talented working in a company that requires to be more transformative than somebody talented working in a company that is more transactional. That is going to define the level of passion and commitment that the talent is going to have to give to the company, because they see themselves reflected in the organization. And the same is for the company making decisions as to who is a talent that we want to keep and which talent may not be appropriate, depending on how grow we want to go, how much we want to scale. So having that mismatch on both sides could be an erosion on the execution front. It could sink the scaling trajectory. It could create organizational dynamics that become really, really difficult to handle. That could affect the goals of the company and how no one is able to see those goals to execute towards them. Or, people who are hiring, people that are not necessarily the right talent for the right roles, or maybe be more reactive in terms of how we're translating, right, what the company used to be versus what the company is now, and how that reflects on the responsibilities we're giving people to do. And overall confusion sometimes as to, what kind of company are we becoming, and how does that reflect in the way in which our people and ourselves show up. So for me, that is a big component of thinking how to sustain our scaling process and how to think through the complexities, right, that affect our human capacity and the touch point that we can bring. Somebody was asking, do I need a team to scale? And how do I afford them with inconsistent cash flow? Because obviously, right, these decisions are going to be made depending on your ability to accommodate these resources into your payroll, into your budget. What I would say is you don't necessarily need a team on payroll, especially if you are an early stage and you're still figuring out where your trajectory is intended to go. But you do need shared effort. You need to build an ecosystem uh, where you alone cannot take the effort forward, right? Where it's becoming just too much for just one person or two. So you can always rely on flexible roles. You can rely on contractors. You can rely on skill shares that may benefit from collaborating with you and the idea that you are building, interns, right? But cash flow follows the consistency and the clarity that you're building within the company, and you don't have to burn your runway to create that consistency if you could leverage more flexible ways to bring collaborators into your ecosystem. And if you show people that what you're building is for real and is something inspiring and is something, that is worth, being a part of, because they want to make that idea happen with you, and they can trust you, then your model is going to start to take traction. And eventually you can make bigger decisions to create a whole entire team that can be full-time, relying on for taking your company to where you need it to go. So start small, stay sustainable, scale when ready, not just when urgent. And the last category of human tensions that I focus on and that I love people, incorporating into their mindset is this idea of emotional rhythm. I call it ethos delusion because it's really our ability to maintain our connection with the life of the company, right? We're building an idea, we're bringing it to life, and for us to see that and to be able to connect with that is where the energy comes from. That's what keeps us going. That's what keeps us energized. That's what keeps the fire in ourselves and others. So if that goes away, if we're not able to contain that, it could also affect, right, our ability to stay on track with our scaling efforts. How it feels to work in your company, how it feels to lead your company, how it feels to decide from inside your company. All of that has a variable to consider in your efforts. And when it's not there, or if we let it not to be there, we're going to feel it for sure. We're going to feel that, the expansion of the company may or may not reach the vision that we have. And we will also see risks, right? Flowing into the mainstream of the company, making it look unrecognizable to everyone. So there is a component that is just going to feel heavy and disconnected, which will generate fear, which could turn into, resistance and pushback eventually. Um, because obviously when we don't see ourselves reflected in the core of what the company is supposed to be and what we're supposed to be a part of, we are going to prioritize the wrong things at the wrong time. We may be, operating from a place of overperforming as opposed to, staying in touch and staying connected to where we're all going. Or we might, see the values failing to translate in behaviors that we also need in place in order to stay strong, right? As we navigate the complexities. And we might let it because we could also be unaware that our identity is diluting and that our connection with the company is fading. And it will pretty much turn into not feeling like the company anymore. And that is going to be perceived by most everybody, and it's going to be perceived by your customers, and it's going to be perceived by your investors. So it has a ripple effect that I think is important to bring back to the equation as a huge factor of success for scaling, especially at a big scale. So scaling is not the enemy of integrity, but it's going to be a test of it. And I would say not ignoring the signals, not treating these things as normal are going to set companies apart from those who actually normalize, right, these variables. The I would say everything that I'm sharing with you is applicable across industries and across sectors. Somebody wanted to know, if any of what we were going to talk about today was specific to nonprofits or if there's any variations I would suggest. And I say that the human tensions of scaling, the psychology of it, the discipline to understand it as a trajectory applies across the board. It does not discriminate. For nonprofits, for example, your product is often trust, mission, or impact, but the same principles apply. You want to protect your ethos, you want to pace your scaling or your growth, and you want to build systems that don't collapse under the pressure, right, that is created for the human capacity as a byproduct of growing and building in more complexity. To end our presentation, I'm going to touch on a couple of things, and you will receive a copy of these in the form of a guide that you can use if you would like to. But I would say we need to really think through missteps that most companies have done that we don't want to repeat. These are patterns. Everything that I'm sharing is not something exclusive to the way I do it or the way, companies have done it historically. These are things that once you have observed these dynamics, at play for so many times, you start to see how costly they are. And my hope is as we recognize the cost of it, especially on the human front, we start to prevent them. We start to figure out how to referee across the process of, bringing our companies to become bigger and stronger. So we talked through all of these, so I'm going to summarize them in terms of, costly misstep, hiring fast, integrating slow, confusing traction with readiness,
Oh,
underestimating
we can't hear you.
the emotional load of leadership, chasing scale without a blueprint. All of these things that are super basic and fundamental are the key to create companies that can last in the long run. There was a question in the audience as well early on when you guys signed up that said, "Is it okay not to scale?" And of course, it is okay not to scale. Everything that I'm sharing with you is obviously for those who may be considering, right, taking this to bigger and bigger and bigger extent. But growth for its own sake is not a virtue. And what matters is designing a business that matches your values, your energy, and not necessarily just that mandate or because everybody's doing it, then I'm going to do the same. And the last point is going to be around leadership and mindset. Been keeping an eye on the shifts that our markets and our landscape in general, geopolitically, economically, right, societally, it's taking. And I still believe that we have to build companies that we dreamed of and companies that we believe in, but it's going to require a complete different level of how we see leadership, not just for better leadership, but for deeper leadership. We need to evolve our approaches from strategic thinking to discernment so we can actually know the decisions that we're making, the impact of them, and we can act on those decisions more responsibly. Not because we can do something, we should do it, from confidence to inner strength. I talk to a lot of founders, even veteran founders, that the times that we're in are even making them question again their purpose. And so that inner strength to be able to stay connected with yourself is going to be a superpower. Becoming a trailblazer, being able to design your own playbooks, your own blueprints, so that your companies can scale in the way in which you envision them to scale. Being an agency way shower now is not more about authority more than it is how can we show others to be empowered, how can we show others to make good decisions, how can we show others the way of leading with purpose and conviction. Ethical acumen, especially as we think about AI and some of the contradictions we're still living through, from a legal ethical perspective, it's going to be on us to bring that into our own environments, right? What are your own boundaries and guardrails that will determine ethical decision making and ethical use of these new tools? And lastly, clarity alone may not be enough. Nuance courage, I think it's more relevant. We have so much information, we have so many versions of the world, of the visions of what we can make happen, that we have to learn how to live in that nuance and find the truth, right, that resonates the most with us so that we can concentrate on that and fuel our ideas and our energy with that truth. And somebody asked me for the top 3 tips for someone wanting to scale solo. And I would say all of these 6 tips apply to all of us in the world that we live in. And if I could add one more, in terms of automation and all these technology conversation, I would say for right now, automate, bring technology, experiment with it where trust isn't required, but save your humanity for the moments that matter. And more importantly, for the vision and the the purpose that you have and for which you're building your company or your idea. And that's the end. I created an interest form as well. If you want to have a 30-minute mentoring with me, if something sparked a thought or an idea or a concern, I'll be happy to continue the conversation. Michelle,
Oh, thank you so
anything
much.
else?
Well, I do want to make sure that we have time to just answer one or two
Okay.
questions here really quick because there's a couple good ones here. This was
Okay.
fantastic. Um,
Okay.
So just right off the bat, this person says, "Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. I find that the scaling mindset is a challenge for different generations. How do you suggest dealing with intergenerational differences of how scaling a business is viewed and valued?" Like, I guess, and I think it could apply like, beyond generational, like, just the way that humans have different perspectives on the way, to successfully scale. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love this topic actually. I'm the mom of a Gen Z who wants to be an entrepreneur. We're not gonna talk about my age, but you can probably do the math. And obviously I navigate very, a spectrum of people who are either leaders or building companies or leaving corporate to move to founders. Um, I think right now we need to hold a perspective that each generation has something to contribute, and we need to figure out how to bring together those perspectives as part of our shared humanity. I don't necessarily support the stigmatization of generations. There's a lot of Gen Z's this and boomers are that. And I think each of us, because we lived in different times, we have a different way in which things have worked. And we bring a value that obviously has brought us to where we are, right? And we need to tap into each of the generations' wisdom to be able to find the shared humanity of it that we can use to now unify the efforts that we are trying to lead, as opposed to the generation battle of who's right and who's wrong. I think we need more unity in what are the different sources of wisdom that we can tap into so that we can become creative on how we do our own way of scaling.
Love that. Absolutely, absolutely. You're taking like the best from every perspective, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I have things that I don't agree with. Like if I were to talk to, the older generation, I'd be like, no, but that's too slow. But I think based on the times that we're in, the best shot we have is to try to figure out which of our wisdoms benefit what we're trying to do.
Wonderful. Amazing. And I know you touched on this, kind of towards the end, on team dynamics. This person is asking, when you're delegating tasks to operations managers or other key personnel, and execution gaps begin to cause loss of time and money. What is the most effective way to address and resolve these issues while still making those team members feel valued, included, and aligned with the company's vision?
Yeah. What I find in the execution space is that when we don't have boundaries and we don't have ways to implement with discipline, things go derailed, right? Everybody starts to do their own thing and we start assuming, we make a lot of assumptions as to what is it that we're doing. And each of us has an assumption and then it becomes chaotic. It's important from an execution perspective that we bring some level of discipline and some level of structure, right? What are the buckets in which this execution needs to be built upon? What are the milestones? What are the metrics? And then what is each member? And these are just basic fundamentals. I'm not saying anything rocket science.
Yeah.
But it really works. It really works when you have an infrastructure where you're time boxing, right? Your effort of execution outside of your day-to-day. Because a lot of people who are executing on a specific goal, on a specific initiative, are also dealing with day-to-day parts of their job. And sometimes those things get confused. And if you don't have the right boundaries to define what you're trying to keep them focused on, those gaps are going to naturally happen, which is going to turn into a bigger, cultural issue and battles and discomfort. But finding a way for you to bring in a disciplined way to execute is, in my perspective, a really, really good decision.
Love that. Love that. So you get the system structure and support in place and those it kind of falls together. Amazing. Lindsay, this has been so wonderful. Just to close us out here, if you had just, one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
I want all of you, whatever you're doing and whatever your idea is and whatever it is that you're building, that you do it from a place of um, true, genuine conviction, and that you put something out in the world that can help, that can truly help us become a better world. We need companies that employ people for good. We need companies that create great products for society to move forward and be better. We need companies that are iconic, that we feel inspired and fired up for. It's been a long time that we don't have that. And I feel like if we are here in this room, we're like the newest generation to bring that forward. And why not? And how cool would that be?
Amazing. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Lindsay, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for just taking the time to speak to the community, share these insights, and set such an amazing overview. And on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, we are just so grateful for you to join us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm excited that you had me and I can share all of this.
Awesome. And to our audience who is here today, we'd love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using those links that are going to be posted in the chat if they haven't already. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.